Welcome back. In this episode, I'd like to show you how you can retrofit clothing that was made for earlier generations of the Genesis figure onto the current generation of the Genesis figure. So by the time I'm recording this video, we're talking Genesis 8 and Genesis 8.1. And clothing that would be made for the previous generation would have been made for Genesis 3, and the generation before that would have been Genesis 2, and the generation before that would have been Genesis. And all these items of clothing can be fitted onto the current generation with something called AutoFit. And that is a quite clever mechanism inside Daz Studio in which it goes and says, okay, if you tell me which generation the clothing has been made for, I can run some calculations and rejig the rigging from the earlier figures onto the current generation. And I can kind of try my best, but it's often not going to look great. So therein kind of lies the problem. This is why we have things like dForce now. But not every item of clothing has dForce. So I'd also like to use this episode to show you a way how you can make auto-fitted clothing much better using an external tool like Marvelous Designer for the process. I'll talk a little bit about Marvelous Designer, what it's capable of, and I'll show you some of the functionality, and then you can decide if this is something that you'd like to look into or not. Let's begin by having a look at my Genesis 8.1 figure here. This is just the base figure. And I'm going to use an item of clothing here that is made for Genesis 2, namely this one here by Karth. It's a Daz original, dirt cheap sometimes. $382 is not bad for a really fun little top that is, stripy and looks quite nice. At least it did on Genesis 2. So it has some basic materials here, and I'm going to use this on Genesis 8.1, and we'll see how AutoFit goes about doing this and how AutoFit actually works, and the pitfalls that you might come across. So just a word of warning, this might not work for every item of clothing. AutoFit sometimes works well, sometimes doesn't work so well. We'll see what it does in this case here. So I'll head over to wardrobe, and in order to be able to see something that is not made for my Genesis figure, I'm going to have to go and untick this little item here in the smart content that says filter by context. You'll still be able to browse there in the regular content library tab, but if you're using smart content like I do, it will look at what is compatible with this figure and then just go and filter that out. So if I go and try to find my foxy striped shirt here, nothing's going to come up. And that's because it knows, hey, that is not something that's compatible with the current figure that you've got selected. So I'm going to go and unselect that. And now if I go and filter this down, the wardrobe tab down to foxy striped shirt, then here it is. So I'll go double click that. And under wardrobe, I'm going to go and just with the figure selector, I'm going to go and double click that. So as soon as I do that, Daz Studio says, hey, this thing isn't made for that figure. And I know that too. So it says auto fit foxy striped shirt. If you had an item of clothing that consists of multiple items like, boots and trousers and skirt and all that, this dialog will pop up several times as each item is going to be loaded. And essentially it wants to know, hey, what was this made for originally? If you don't know, or if it was for a figure that wasn't even Genesis, click unsupported here. If you do know, like in my case, I know this was made for Genesis 2 female, I'm going to go and have to select that here. If I don't, if I select something else, if I select Genesis 3 female accidentally, then the results will be less than desirable. So let's select whatever this was made for. And under what type of item is this, you can leave none. That's usually the safest option. You can also, if you know what it is, you can kind of narrow it down, like a knee-length dress or full body type thing, or if it was just hair, short hair or shoulder length hair. That would kind of make sense. In our case, it's neither really, so I'm going to just leave this on none. Hit accept and let Daz Studio calculate this thing. So right now you can see it's not quite fitting yet, but then all of a sudden it'll pop into place, and it hasn't done such a bad job, I have to say. I mean, it is certainly usable. And if you know a little bit about previous generations of Genesis, then you know that the shoulders, for example, would have been straight due to the T-pose. And in fact, I think we can see that here in this image. This is what it would have looked like in its resting position. So AutoFit has done a good job in putting the shoulders down, and it also has tried to follow the contours of the body, and it kind of, it's not unusable. It's actually on the base figure, it looks quite nice. The trouble, let me just go and put some material on here. I'll open that up, Foxy Stripe Shirt. Let's use the blue stripes here. There we go, that's nice. The trouble often starts when you're not using the base Genesis figure, when you're using something like a custom morph, like a custom character. And let me go dial that in here. I'll go under parameters, then I head over to actor here, open that up, then I'll open up the full body section, and in it I'll have people, and then I've got all my morphs here, maybe just my real life, real world morphs. And let's see, so there's something like maybe Dharma. Let me go and try her. And you can see as I move my figure into a different shape, the auto-fitted shirt will follow, and it does an okay job here. But I can also see that it's not working great. So there's a little bit of distortion here, and especially the stripes will make that very obvious. How about honey? I can try honey. It kind of works. It kind of works. As soon as it goes and pops out into position, it kind of works. Let me use something more extreme, like maybe the Olympia body. She's a bit fuller. And as soon as I do that, I can see that the breast area really doesn't look good. So it looks like this is spray painted on, and I can see a lot of distortions here with this particular material. You might find a different material, like a plain color material, that will work better, but it doesn't look real. It just looks as if it's spray painted on. So dForce, or an item that would have been made for this character, would look much better. So, you know, it's a mixed bag. Technically, I can use this item of clothing, but it's just not looking great with auto fit here. So let me show you how we can improve this with Marvelous Designer. And in fact, before we go and export our bits and pieces here, I'm going to go and show you, give you a quick overview of what Marvelous Designer actually is and why it is so powerful. This is what it looks like in its default state. We have a viewport on the left-hand side in which we typically see a figure. And on the right-hand side, we have a 2D window in which we typically see something like an item of clothing that was made up of patterns, like 2D patterns, like we have in real fashion design. So my t-shirt, for example, would perhaps be made of a front part and a back part and 2 sleeve parts, and they would be sewn together in my size so that would kind of fit me. If those patterns would be, you know, too narrow on the edges, then it would be too tight, or if they'd be too large, then the t-shirt would be baggy. And this is exactly what it's like in Marvelous Designer. So let me go and show you the library here. We have some default items of clothing that we can bring in, like this dress here, or this 2-part outfit, or there's another dress here, or maybe just this skirt here. If I go and double click this is just a preview. If I double click it, then the item of clothing will be loaded. On the left hand side, we see the actual skirt here, and on the right hand side, we can see how the skirt is made up. So we have 2 pieces on the front, we have 2 pieces on the back, and we have 4 pieces that make up the waistband here. So let me go and close this down. Typically, you also have a figure in here, so we have some avatars that we can load, but we can also bring in our Genesis figure in a moment. Let me just go bring in my assistant Camilla here. She's not based on Genesis, by the way. That's just a demonstration so that we don't have an empty skirt in the scene here. There we go. That's Camilla wearing the skirt. Or not quite, actually. Let's go and close this down. Marvelous Designer is essentially a very sophisticated cloth draping engine, and I can activate that over here. I can use the CPU to do this. I can use a super accurate calculation here, or I can just use my GPU to do this, and that'll be a little bit faster in calculating the drape of the skirt. So if I go and press space bar, then it will start calculating, and you can see that the skirt kind of pops into place, and it'll now fit my avatar. Had this been a different figure, then this would also fit. Now watch as I go and literally play with the skirt. So I can go and move this around pretty much in real time, which is like seriously exciting. So if you needed something to fit differently, you can just go and, like in real life, you can just take the cloth and drape it as you want. That's very, very powerful. So if you had a top and you wanted one strap of the shoulder to go down, or if you want to open a jacket, or you want to, you know, maybe emulate the wind wafting with the skirt, you can do that. A GPU is a little bit less accurate than the CPU calculation, but it's just so much faster. So this is essentially what it's designed for, and clothing designers would go and lay out their patterns here, even multi-layer them, and then just go and bring them onto the avatar on the right, and then, you know, make several adjustments. You can also use things like buttons and zippers. It's a very, very sophisticated tool. It's currently, as I'm recording this, in version 11. I've been using it since version 4, but not really the way it's designed to be used. So I'm using it by importing my clothing from Daz Studio as OBJs, and then letting these get draped in Marvelous Designer. So let's have a look how that would work. I need to go and export, and we'll just stick with the A pose here for now, but we'll also go into a posed character after this. So let me go and export my avatar first, my Genesis figure without the shirt. So I'll go and disable the shirt here. And with my figure selected, I'm going to go and export her as an OBJ. I might go into my new project here. I'll just go make a new folder that I'll call MD, just for Marvelous Designer. And I will go and call this here Genesis G8 Custom, maybe. I don't have to change her to base resolution. I can use a high resolution for this. I'll use my Daz Studio export option here. And I might go and leave the materials on for today. You don't have to do that. It kind of depends on if you'd like to see a gray figure in Marvelous Designer or just a whole Genesis figure. I will make my Genesis figure available with control click so that all the parented items will also become invisible, like the eyelashes and maybe the tear duct. I'm going to go and bring back my striped shirt here, also with control click. Now notice that my striped shirt is still fitted to my avatar, so I still see these distortions here, and I don't really want that. So let me go and right click on the shirt here, and I will head over to Fit Foxy Striped Shirt to not the Genesis 8 figure, but instead to none. I don't want this fitted at all. I want this to be a loose item in the scene, and we'll see why in a moment. If I hit accept, then I can see that all the distortions go away and it becomes its regular resting shirt. I might even go and unparent it from my Genesis figure, so just left click and drag that down. Not strictly necessary, but now it's no longer part of the hierarchy of the Genesis figure. So with my Foxy striped shirt selected, I'm going to go and export that as well. And this needs to happen in base resolution. So I don't know if this is in fact high res or base res. Okay, it just comes in as base res, so that's fine. But if your item of clothing would be high resolution, you need to switch this to base res before you export it. Thankfully, this doesn't have a high resolution on it, so we can just go and use this and export that. File, export, also as OBJ, and I'm going to call this one Foxy Shirt A-pose, just so that I remember what that is. I'll use exactly the same as I had before here. Hit accept. And that's my work done in Daz Studio. Let's go over to Marvelous Designer and import all these things. I'm going to go and start with a brand new scene. And in fact, I'm also going to go and click on Camilla here, right click and say delete avatar. I don't want to use Camilla. I don't need to use my 2D window here. I don't have clothing that is based on patterns. So I'm going to go and switch this over on the bottom right. In the latest version of Marvelous Designer, it has various viewport options here. If I click this one, then I'll have a full screen preview of just my 3D viewport, and that's kind of what I want. I'll go and import my avatar first. So File, Import OBJ, and I'll go over in my new project into the MD folder where I have my two OBJs. So G8 Custom OBJ is my avatar. I'll import that, and here in the dialog I'm going to go and select Load Type Open, Object Type Avatar. This is exactly what I want. There's other options here that we're going to need later, but Open and Avatar is exactly what I want. I do not need automatic arrangement points. This would be important or helpful if you were to create clothing based on patterns. We're not going to do that. Scale, I'm going to check centimeters. Daz Studio, very, very kindly provided here. I'm going to use 100%. That's perfect. I'm going to leave the X, Y, and Z axis as they are. Y is up because Y is up in Daz Studio. And this box here at the bottom, align bottom to ground, that must be unticked. That's very important. Let's leave that unticked. Hit OK. And see our Genesis figure appear in our viewport. Here she is. So that's our avatar. Oh yeah, navigation is a little bit different than we might remember it. It's a bit like in ZBrush, if you're familiar with that. Right click off the figure to rotate, middle mouse button click to pan, and scroll the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Okay, so let me go and import my item of clothing now. That will be a loose object that we will drape in Marvelous Designer. Almost the same thing again. File, Import, Add, OBJ to Garment. That's a very helpful feature that's been introduced in Marvelous Designer. I'll pick the Foxy shirt here. I believe I called it Fixie shirt, which is crazy. And here I'm going to go and load type add. That's what I want. I don't want to open a new object. I'd like to add it to the current scene. And the object type, I'm going to pick garment. So that's quite nice. I have the option to trace my 2D patterns from the UV map. I'm not going to do that either. I'm just going to use the full solid OBJ. Same thing, scale 100%, Daz Studio, everything else as it was. Hit OK. And here we have our shirt. It's barely visible because the two figures kind of intersect with one another, and this is what it would have looked like had I made my Genesis figure visible again. You know, just for us to see these objects a little bit better, I'm going to go and right click on my avatar, select all faces, and I'll just give my avatar a different color at the bottom right here on the property editor. If I say color, I'll just pick something like a dark gray here. Hit OK, then at least we can see some separation between my avatar and my shirt. So if you go and click off it and then on it, then you can see that these are the pieces of my avatar. And if you click on the shirt, then this is the shirt selected. So technically all I would now need to do is go and hit my spacebar to fit the shirt. Let's try that out. Spacebar, and Marvelous Designer should be clever enough to literally just push it out and make sure to drape it around my figure. And there we have a much nicer looking shirt. And I can also go and drape it up if I wanted to pull that up a little bit, or if there's things poking through, then I can literally go and left click and drag these things off. I can manipulate the shoulders and everything. So this is essentially the magic behind it. So if you're into clothing and draping it like you would in real life, this is what you can do. Now, one thing that I can just about see here, and I believe there's a stretch map that you can display. It will show you that the current garment is technically too tight for our figure. So this is a very tight fitting shirt, and really if this was real life, then this person in the real world would have probably used a size larger than this, and that would mean we'd have more cloth to play with and we'd see more wrinkles. So maybe we're going to go and do that. I'll hit the space bar to stop the simulation, and then I'll go and just select my shirt here and hit the delete button so that disappears. I'm going to import it again and make it 5 or 10% larger. Let's see what that looks like. So file, import, add, obj to garment. I'll use the fixie shirt again that I've misspelled. And in here under scale, I'm going to try and type in 110% just to see if that fits her a little bit better. This might be too large, but we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Here it is. Not only is it larger, it's also been imported slightly higher up. So I'm going to go and use my manipulator to just drag that roughly in the position that it should be, like here. And maybe that'll be a better fit. Let's try it out. I'll hit my space bar and let Marvelous Designer do its magic. There we go. This is actually slightly better. I think maybe the middle ground would be ideal, like 105 or something. Actually, you know, now that I think about it, it is actually exactly how I'd like it to be fitted. Perfect. Let me just quickly show you the CPU simulation in comparison. That will make for a more accurate draping, but it'll also take a little bit longer. I have kind of a medium powerful computer here. I have a dual Xeon computer, and you can see that I can still do all these things, but they're much slower now. But apparently I also get a slightly higher resolution of the drape. If you're happy with the drape, you can literally press the space bar and it will stop the simulation there and then. So if I do this, it's kind of frozen with this wrinkle at the bottom here. And let's say this is now our favorite drape. Well, let me just go and press the space bar again and put down the shoulder a little bit, something like that, and let it settle down. Like so. Press the space bar to stop the simulation. And now, much like before, we can go and export this and import this as a morph on our not fitted clothing item. And then this is going to look exactly like it does in Marvelous Designer now. Kind of cool. Let me go and say File, Export, OBJ selected. So that'll be with my shirt selected here. Export, OBJ selected. I'll put it in the same directory and I'll call it Foxy MD Drape A Pose, just so that I remember what that is. Because this is probably not what you want to use for a render. You probably want a proper pose, so we'll talk about that in a moment. Export options, new dialog comes up, in which we need to select all the selected patterns. So we could also use all avatars or all graphics and trims. We don't need to do that, just all the selected patterns. We want to export a single object. We want to weld it. We want for this to be thin, and we want the unified UV coordinates. So that's really all we want. Scale 100%. That'll be all good. Hit OK, and Marvelous Designer will export this. Meanwhile, back in Daz Studio, I can go and make my Genesis figure visible again. And I can see this is kind of like the mess that we've seen before. That's okay. We're going to use Morph Loader Pro to import the morph that we've just created in Marvelous Designer. Let's hit Edit, Object, Morph Loader Pro with my Foxy shirt selected. And in here under Morph Files, I'm going to go and pick my Foxy MD Drape A Pose file. Here it is. And I suppose you remember what comes next. We need to open this menu, and under Reverse Deformations, we need to select Yes, because we had a custom character. So we need to tell Morph Loader, hey, these are deltas on top of other deltas that we want to isolate. Hit Accept, and we should see hopefully nothing except for a success message, morph created successfully. With the Foxy shirt selected under Morphs, we can now go and drag up our slider and should see the same morph that we've seen in Marvelous Designer. Is this crazy good or what? Now this shirt fits properly. If I had left it with the auto fitting, it would just not look good. And look at that, an older item of clothing on Genesis 8 looking seriously good. And this isn't even high res, so I could now go and add my own subdivision surface modifier to make that even more high res if I wanted to. That'll bring out the wrinkles even better. In fact, why don't we do that? Let me go and switch this to smooth shaded so that all these little wrinkles here, they're going to look so much smoother. Let me go and do that. Edit, Object, Geometry, convert to sub D like we discussed earlier. And now I have an even higher resolution in my viewport. Pretty neat, huh? Let me go switch this back to filament and show you something else. So currently, what I've done here is the shirt is separate from the object. I can go and move the shirt up and down. I can go and pose my figure, but the shirt isn't going to follow. So if I do this now, I can, well, it's difficult to see here. If I do this now, you can see that my figure moves, but the shirt does not. And that's the expected behavior because this is no longer a conforming item of clothing. And I don't want it to be. I want Marvelous Designer to be in charge of the draping. Let me go and dial in a pose on our Genesis figure. And then we're going to go and let Marvelous Designer drape that pose again. And that works by showing Marvelous Designer a before and after. So I've already imported my Genesis character in the A pose. Now I'm going to go and give her a pose. I'll go and make my shirt invisible again. And pick something. I'll go and filter by context again so that we can see poses that are compatible with my figure here. Perhaps the Z striker poses here. I'll go and filter this by G8F just so that I see poses for the base figure rather than the Victoria figure. And maybe this one will work. There, that's a pose. Let's just hope nothing intersects with one another. I think we can just about leave it like that. I might just go take the arm here with Power Pose and just move it up a little bit. Marvelous Designer has similar issues that dForce has, so it will also explode garments if geometry should intersect. So I'm hoping this is going to work. I haven't tested this out. I've got to be brutally honest with you. So I can now go and export my Genesis figure again, once again in the current resolution. Export, and I will go and say G8F with pose. If you do this with multiple poses, then of course, name your poses adequately so that you remember what they are. I'll do that and go back to, once exported, go back to Marvelous Designer and now import this as a morph target on my Genesis figure. And this is seriously interesting because it means that Marvelous Designer will redrape the clothing as it interpolates between the A pose and my posed character. Now let's have a look. So that happens, it doesn't matter what is selected in the viewport. You just head over to File, Import Add, OBJ. I will select G8F with pose. And now I get that import dialog again, in which I'm going to say add, but I'm not going to use a garment. I'm going to use a morph target instead. And it'll be clever enough to figure out what this morph target is supposed to be used on. So it'll know that these deltas are not meant for the shirt. It'll just look for something that has these types of vertices in the scene. Morphing frame count is a little bit like what we've discussed in regards to dForce. That's the interpolation amount of frames that Marvelous Designer is supposed to take between one pose and the other. So the default is 30, and that's probably going to work for our case. If it's a complicated pose, then you may have to use 60. I might just leave it on 60 and see what happens. Scale, same as before, Daz Studio 100%, Y up, and hit OK. And let's see what Marvelous Designer does with this. So the shape might look a little weird. If you look at the fingers, they seem to disappear, but that's okay. It just doesn't do this as an animation. It just moves the points from one position to another and literally just uses the shortest distance between them. And that is not necessarily what we would expect to see. So during the drape. But that's okay. We've got our posed figure now, and the shirt has already been re-draped, so I don't have to do much else with it. I would probably suggest to press the spacebar here just to let it resettle this down. And in case you wanted to make any more adjustments, so maybe I now want to go and take her shoulder up a little bit, or maybe I want to take the other one down, whatever I want to do. Maybe I'll just take that up a tad and bring this a bit down. But you can see the power in this and how you can literally drape cloth like it was in real life, like it would be in real life. I'll leave everything else as it is. But you can see the power that this has. Mind you, this might not work with every item of clothing. So much like, I'll press the spacebar again to stop the simulation. Much like with dForce, some garments might fall apart. So that has happened before. Export OBJ selected with the shirt. I'm going to say Foxy shirt posed. Hit save. I will say select all patterns, no avatars, no graphical trims, single object, weld, thin unified UV coordinates, hit OK. So sometimes clothing might fall apart, it might open up, things might fall to the ground, and it might just, do that. This would happen if clothing isn't connected, if seams are not welded, as they say in 3D. Thankfully, there is a selection brush that lets you paint on certain pieces and items of your clothing and exclude them from the simulation. I'm not going to cover that here, but if you do have that problem, there is an option around that. There's a way around it. So that is good to know. I'll bring back my completely non-fitting Foxy stripe shirt here and go back to my parameters tab under morphs and just reset that morph with Alt left click on it so that it goes back to 0. And I'll go and import my next morph, Morph Loader Pro, and I will pick the Foxy Shift Post. My goodness, I can't spell anymore these days. Crazy. I'm working hours that are just too long, quite clearly. Over here, once again, very important. Reverse deformations, yes. Hit accept. Morph has been created successfully. Now when we dial it in, the shirt fits. And it's looking handsome too. And that is how you can fix things with Marvelous Designer. As I said, it doesn't work with every item of clothing, but with patience, there's a lot that Marvelous Designer has to offer. So you can also fit existing items of clothing that are available for Marvelous Designer. So they have their own store here inside the app, so you can go and preview things, you can download things, and then you can fit them to literally any avatar. It doesn't have to be the Genesis figure. Maybe you got a custom designed monster that needs clothing or whatnot. Marvelous Designer can accommodate that as well. You can also get Marvelous Designer clothing from other sources like ArtStation. There's a lot of interesting stuff available there. And many of the clothing items that you see on the Daz store and on other marketplaces that are made for the Genesis figure, they've often started live inside Marvelous Designer and then with various other applications have found their way onto the Daz store. So this is often what clothing creators use as a starting point or even as a fully fledged tool to create dresses and trousers and scarves and even things like mattresses and furniture and stuff like that. So yes, very interesting toy to play with. Have a play with it. They have a 30-day trial version and see if it is something that you might be able to use in your workflow. I find it invaluable, especially to bring older items of clothing back to life. So there we have it. Maybe in the next video, we can go and turn this into a fully fledged portrait and then use that render that comes out of it as something that we can use in a post-production session that I'd like to do on Photoshop to close this part out. Stay tuned for that.